is Steve. He is the Director for International Human Resources at Northrop Grumman, and he's going to talk to us today about their journey with employee experience. And so, Steve, the first question I'd like to ask is, what sort of company is Northrop Grumman? Can you set the scene for us a little bit and tell us about your history, your context, your challenges?
Sure. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Northrop Grumman, I'm working on the assumption that many people in this room won't know who we are. We are a Fortune 100 company in the States, 90,000 employees. We are one of the world's leading aerospace, cyberspace, and space organizations. So we work on some of the coolest things in the world. If you're into space, we built the lunar lander that landed on the moon. And in a couple of weeks' time, we're a telescope called the James Webb Telescope, which is the successor to the Hubble telescope. We built that. It's going to be launched in 2 weeks' time. We're not making a big song and dance about it because it has to go 1 million miles from Earth and it may go wrong. We'll make a big song and dance about it when it's properly positioned. But for now, NASA has that telescope. Northrop, as I think I said, we're a 30 billion turnover. We have 90,000 employees. The majority of those are in the US. I've been with that organization now coming up for 9 years. I was hired because of my background in international business and HR and business consulting to help set up their international operations. We have a significant challenge around the attraction and retention of STEM engineers in the States. Pre-pandemic, we calculated over 5 years that we needed to hire 50,000 new people over 5 years. And that's a combination of an aging workforce. And the average age at Northrop Grumman in the US was 51. It's come down a little bit now, but also a significant number of new programs that we'd won, and an inability to stop attrition at the rate that we wanted it to stop. So the last 2 years, we've hired 14,000 a year, but sadly, attrition has continued to go up. And that's why back in 2019, I started on our employee experience journey, which we're still on. We are still on it, yes.
Yes, so a fiercely competitive market for talent. Continuing problems with attrition and a huge ask and the sheer number of people that you need to attract.
And some other things as well, and it reflects a little bit about what we heard this morning. And this was, remember, pre-COVID, and I can talk a little bit about how the work we did 2 years ago when we started talking about employee experience, the reaction we got was, we don't need to worry about that, we're fine. And literally now I'm being asked to prepare a paper for our board in December about why we should take employee experience seriously. So our employees, we would think about who we were targeting to hire, particularly in places like California or anywhere in the US, they had so many other opportunities to go and work for the Googles and Amazons, startups and all sorts of the world. And whilst we make really cool stuff, not everybody may want to work there. So we realized we were in a really competitive market.
Right. And so then why is employee experience the answer?
Well, that came about from our research. We did some research. I took a group of high potentials. We went to Silicon Valley in the summer of 2019, and we met with HP and Workday and Box and some other technology companies to ask them how they were responding in those days to the future of work, because that was the buzzword then. So we wanted to understand what's going on. And we got lots of really interesting examples. One of the common things that every technology company talked about was that they'd started to focus on the employee experience. We heard moments that matter. We heard personas, which came up a moment ago. These were things that my HR team or HR had never heard of before. So we were like, okay, what does that mean? I followed up that. I actually went and met with the professor at Stanford that runs the design lab at Stanford. And actually in your report, you've got quite a lot on design thinking. So I absolutely think people should take note to read that. And he introduced me to a guy called Phil Gilbert at IBM, who is their design thinking guru. And I spent a big engagement with IBM. And IBM had rolled out design thinking, including within their HR. And that's all about bringing the employee into the design. And there's a really good Forrester report, which showed that IBM had a 3 times return, economic return on their design thinking implementation over 7 years. So we were convinced that putting the employee at the center of what we did was a way of reframing our HR strategy. or I was convinced, my CHRO was convinced. The story then is whether others were convinced at first.
Right. Okay. So you have this fiercely competitive talent market. You have all these people you need to attract. You have an ongoing issue with attrition. You've gone out, talked to people, done the research, discovered that employee experience could be the key to answering this problem. So my next question is, what did you do?
So we came back from our experience in California. I had my group of high potentials present to the executive team for HR. And the executive team for the HR went, that's really interesting, but it doesn't apply to us. We're doing fine. We're recruiting all these people. Everything's good. A couple of people in the room were like, oh, that's quite interesting. One of my colleagues at the beginning of 2020 decided to redesign the benefits process or the benefits scheme for 90,000 employees. This is a very contentious issue, benefits in Northrop Grumman. It may not be in your organizations, it's hugely contentious there. And he decided to do a conjoint analysis. And for those of you who know what conjoint analysis is, it involves bringing people in and getting them to design their ideal benefits package. So it was a real example of getting the voice of the employee into something practical. And that was a huge success when it was rolled out, to the point where people were saying, why has that gone so well? And it was like, well, do you think it's because we asked the employees what they were interested in? And yeah, we set boundaries before we got into those conversations. And then the other thing we did last year, and by now we had lockdown and everything else, is I decided to, with our CHRO, to run some design thinking boot camps for all of the HR leadership teams. So we ran 24 hours of virtual boot camps. We had IBM come in and teach us design thinking methodology. And that was an interesting experience. It was good and bad at the same time.
What was good and bad about it?
What was good is, and in fact, the person I sat next to at dinner last night reminded me, yeah. So what was good is it reminded me about a couple of things. One, 40 years ago when I was doing my postgrad studies, I had a great professor who talked then about the psychological contract, the importance of getting the balance between the employee and the employer. So it reminded me that actually over a long period of time, that balance had become very, very imbalanced towards the employer because we weren't really listening to the employer. So design thinking really reinforced the principle of bringing people into the design of things themselves. The other thing that I sat next to my friend down there, we were talking about our days in consulting and how we used to go out onto shop floors when we did consulting, having been in the boardroom, telling us the board how they wanted to do things. And when you go and talk to the employees, they tell you how things really are. So that was really good. The methodology is quite straightforward and simple. There's nothing magical about it. If you've done Lean Six Sigma, if you've done any consulting methodologies, it's quite a straightforward process. But philosophically, it was about bringing the voice of the employee in. Actually, one of the things we talked about on our team, and we'll talk a bit about our experience of trying to get your life cycle to work, or our version of it, is for years, our company had talked about the voice of the customer. And that was so important. Nobody disagreed. It was great to break down silos with the voice of the customer. We never talked about the voice of the employee to break down the same silos. So we had two philosophically different approaches to the same sort of problem. What was bad about it was we rolled the training out virtually at a time of COVID. People were incredibly stressed out and burnt out, the HR leadership team. The HR leadership team, some people really got it straight away. They were like, yeah, I love it, I can apply it. And we started to see little applications. Others were like, nah, it's too complicated. Why don't we just do agile? And it was like, okay, well, that is another approach. But what I realized then is trying to go big on methodology wasn't the answer. We had to find some practical examples and bring it to life.
You encountered sort of resistance. This is what you did. You went out, you looked at what was going on, found this way forward, determined what you have to do. So then how did you do it? Right.
So firstly, we actually, in our 2020 human capital strategy, we put the words placing the employee at the center of all we do. And everybody went, yeah, whatever, it's just on a slide. And then we used that as the hook to start challenging work that we were doing to really put the employee at the center of what we do. So this year is largely, we've been very consumed with COVID. We've also implemented Workday to all our employees. We have a big Workday implementation. We have lots going on in the HR team. But one of the things we started to do is we did our own map of moments that matter. And we identified 6 journeys or 6 stages of the journey for an employee. And we labeled them all as my. So my introduction to Northrop Grumman, my development, my resources, my lifestyle. It was really interesting when we looked at a number of these moments. There were lifestyle things, particularly about how people reacted to issues in your life. And you had a number of them, like bereavement or a natural disaster. We've got a lot of people that live in areas of typhoons. We react to COVID, et cetera, and my exit. And using the words "my" really started shifting the agenda, to the point where my CHRO sent me her board deck to present to the board in June this year, and said, can you just review the board deck and make sure we're saying the right things? And there was a slide in there, which was a real HR slide, which had onboarding, career development, recruitment, and it was all the HR processes. And I said, why don't you take those and just use this, my introduction, and just say to the board that that's how we're going to bring the employee experience to the center of what we do. So language really matters, really matters. And now I've got a team which has been working on the My Introduction to Northrop Grumman, which covers when you apply for a job through to 90 days post-joining. We're just at the point now where we've identified the key moments that matter through that journey. We've identified the process owners that make the experience work. So not just HR, technology, the line manager, in our case, security departments, facilities, all sorts of things. And we're building a employee experience measurement survey, for want of a better word, with our data analytics team. So we will pulse people and use that data to go back and say, you know, Mr. Technology, they didn't get their laptop on time. And in the past, Mr. Technology would have said, or Miss Technology, I don't know, would have said, yeah, but my job is just to give them a laptop in week 1. And we would say, that isn't really the experience we want. They want it on day 1, it needs to be working, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to use that sort of detailed process map and identification of measures and a measurement set to then drive the governance and conversations to maximize that employee experience. Now we're halfway through designing that. We picked my introduction because we thought it would be easier to do. I'm interested to see when we pick my lifestyle, how we do that. But we've got a team that's working on that at the moment, which is quite good.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fantastic. And I have to say, the first time I talked to Steve about the work they're doing, I was also really struck by how much just that little putting "my" in front of each stage, how much that really can shift the perspective. Yeah,
because philosophy is important. I mean, we'll talk about the 2 other areas that we really are going to major on. We've talked a lot about that. Is for my HR colleagues, the design thinking training actually got to a point of a shared philosophy. So all of a sudden, people were like, oh, okay, this is what it's about. So we're actually I'm putting together a program to upskill our HR generalists in areas, not just like analytics and things like that, but also in consulting skills, in how they engage line managers, and also really educating HR practitioners around the latest thinking and practical examples of employee experience. And then we've got to get at middle managers and line managers and leadership to really change their mindset, because I think that's the hardest bit in the power balance, because our people are used to saying, hey, I've spent 40 years here. I built that satellite. I built that fantastic airplane that nobody can see when it flies. I did all this secret stuff you're not supposed to know. So it was good enough for me. You should be lucky to work here. And of course, we see that in our generation, in the generations that are coming through, where they're saying, yeah, that's all really interesting, but I want to do something different. So we're also seeing that with our reaction to social justice and all sorts of things that are going on outside. So really educating and supporting the change of, well, actually supporting line managers in their own experience as employees, because it's their experience. But that, I think, is a crucial role for us in HR going forward.